In the Gun, episode 152 here of your new favorite WVU football podcast. We've got a Big 12 Pro Day to discuss. We've got some moving and some shaking for the basketball programs at WVU. And, of course, we've got spring ball finally happening here in action. Plenty to discuss on this edition of ITG. I am Wesley Euler, flanked by the best teammate in the business, the signal caller Jed Drenning here on this edition of ITG. Our working man, Owen Schmidt, a little busy this week, so Jed and I are going to take care of this episode of In the Gun. In this episode of ITG, brought to you in part, as always, by our friends at BetOnline, where the game starts. Jed, what do I want to call it here? The draft process has started a long time ago for former Mountaineer football players, for former collegiate football players all across the landscape, right? Everyone knows the drill. You've got the combines, you've got the pro days, all culminates in the NFL draft about exactly a month from now at the end of April, the last Thursday in April, the 25th, when the draft, the first round gets underway in the National Football League this season. Well, we had the Big 12 pro days for the first time taking place, all of them at a neutral location down there in Dallas, Texas, and Jerry World and the Star and all those facilities down there. Handful of Mountaineers, I believe 9 Mountaineers participating, and a pretty nice showing, a noteworthy performance from our guy Beanie Bishop as well, too.
Yeah, it's historic in the sense it's the first time that we've centralized this. It's a Brett Yormark brainchild kind of thing. And so all Big 12 teams and their pro day participants meeting up in one central location in Texas. The only downside that I've encountered to doing this, I like the opportunities that this affords the teams and the conference from a branding standpoint. I think if it works, other conferences might follow suit in years to come. It's experimental right now, but the only downside is traditionally when West Virginia did it on site in Morgantown, it also opened up the opportunity for other small college nearby players
Sure.
to kind of take part, or even former Mountaineers to take part. So it closes the door on that because now you're left scrambling. Like I had a friend of the program, actually. Jeff Triplett was trying to get somebody lined up with a pro day opportunity, and ordinarily it would have been Morgantown with West Virginia. Marshall's was closed, so you're left scrambling, finding for another one. So there's an opportunity out there. Maybe the Mountain East Conference does their own, whatever it might be. That's the only downside to it. But outside of that, yeah, pro days have always been unique in their own right, much different than what goes on in Indianapolis, and not just because of who's invited, right? So 9 Mountaineers invited to this as opposed to just Zach Frazier invited to Indianapolis. And what you like about it, you start to immediately see with what Beanie Bishop, for instance, did. He clocked the fastest time among all Big 12 participants in the 40 at a 4.39. That's the type of things that when when NFL scouts start to look at that and compare those measurables with what they see on tape and how he plays the ball in the air and the numbers that he had that led to his consensus All-American standing, that's going to help his cause. So you have guys from Beanie to Devin to Marcus Floyd, Zach Frazier, obviously, D. Hawkins, Lee Koba, Noah Massey, Doug Nestor, Malachi's down there. So it opens the door of opportunity, the window of opportunity for some guys that didn't make the trip to Indy. And, you never know. There's an outside chance you might have one or two of these other Mountaineers sneak in there day 2, day 3 as potential draftees, or at least fortify their standing as undrafted free agents after it's over, after the draft closes. But I think it's an interesting opportunity for a decent number of Mountaineers to get down there and hop their wares and put their best foot forward, and happy for Beanie. But Beanie's not the only one that had a solid showing. So I think it's a positive, it's a net gain. As most of the things Brett Yormark has done, let's just see kind of where it goes from here. Like I said, he's always about brand equity of the conference, and I think that's really the motivation behind this on some level. But for West Virginia, Yeah, to get 9 kids in front of that number of scouts, it's more convenient. This is all about these pro days are all about scout convenience, right?
100%.
In other words, how many teams can show up to watch all the kids at one school or a handful of schools on a given day? So, from that standpoint, let's just say that you're a front office executive with an NFL team, you have to like it because in the past you had to disseminate reps or scouts
Sure.
to potentially a
Sure.
dozen different venues to take in these dozen schools' best players, whereas now oh, we just catch a flight to Dallas and we can watch all 12 of them in a mini combine kind of setting. So it all makes sense. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
So let's see how, in other words, in the afterglow of it, let's see what the response is and see where it goes from there.
No, you're absolutely right. And a lot of those things you touched on, it's the ebb and the flow of the whole thing, right? I think I've shared this with you before. I've got a friend from high school who works in scouting for one of the NFL teams that plays in the AFC South. How about that? That's the big of a hint that I'll give you. And him and I during the combine have a night where we'll go out and grab dinner and drinks and everything together and catch up and all that. And I was asking him about this, Jed, and it's funny. He said, love kind of the like the standardized location of it, right? That it's like assembly line scouting very much. You know what I mean? You can get a
Yeah.
lot of guys together. You can evaluate them all at the same time. That aspect of it is great. He said the one thing that I will miss out on though is talking to people at the facilities on campus at these
Great point.
universities. Yeah, because he's like, no, he's like, nobody can tell you. He literally said to me, no one can tell you more about David Long than the lady in the cafeteria who's serving him his meals every day. You know what I mean? He
Absolutely.
said, those are the people you talk to. Those are the people you go there and you go, hey, tell me about David Long. Hey, tell me about Will Greer. Hey, tell me about Letty Brown. You know what I mean? Is he a good kid? Is he nice? Is he friendly? All those different things. So it's all part of the evolution of this process, right? But I think,
The
yeah,
downside.
with all the good comes some bad. With some of the bad, there's usually plenty of
Yep.
good. So yeah, like you said, historic in the sense that it's the first time, and love seeing that from Beanie as a guy who, I think rightfully so a lot of talk about how he was snubbed from the combine. So I'm happy to see him go out there and put in a noteworthy performance as well.
He's done the right thing all the way, including his participation in the bowl game. What
Yeah,
happened when he
yeah.
participated in the bowl game? Among other things, what happened? He had an opportunity to
Took a
return the
kickoff
first punt
back
of
to
his
the
college
house.
career,
Yeah.
and he took it to the house. So that's one more thing when he's trying to expand his portfolio and make
No doubt.
his, feathers a little brighter than all the peacocks next to him in the eyes of these scouts because he took part in the bowl game, that happened. So it's hard not to pull for Beanie Bishop and the rest of these guys as well. So let's hope that a lot of good things come out of it. Maybe let's keep our fingers crossed that a couple other guys outside of Zach maybe sneak in to have their name called at some point before the draft draws to a close, even before the undrafted free agents are signed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Another thank you to our friends at Fortis, our guy Rick Lewis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. Jed, Fortis is where you go if you need a new roof, right? Well, Drake is where you go if you need a new head basketball coach. you
Well
see,
played.
you see what I
Well
did
played.
there. Of course, everybody knows Josh Eilert was working under the interim tag this past season after everything that transpired, almost a year ago with the basketball program and a tumultuous offseason, a tumultuous season. It was announced, I think, 12 or 13 days ago by Ren Baker in the athletic department that they were undergoing a national search for the next head coach of the men's basketball program. Well, earlier this week, that was announced. Today, he had his formal press conference, and it is Darian DeVries, the 23rd head coach in the history of the men's basketball program at West Virginia University. Spent the previous 6 seasons at Drake, won 20-plus games every year that he was at Drake, has a career .732 winning percentage as a head coach. Just an incredible winning percentage there. Of course, Drake plays in the Missouri Valley Conference, the MVC. He led them to 2 tournament titles and 1 regular season title over the last 6 years, 3 NCAA tournament appearances in that time as well, too, which is important to note for a couple reasons here, Jed. One being 6 years that he was at Drake, 3 tournament appearances, but one of the tournaments actually got canceled. So 3 times in 5 opportunities, really, he took Drake to the postseason. Would have been 4 and 6 if COVID wouldn't have canceled the 2020 tournament. But I think that's important to note with some of these things, too, that we talk about 6 seasons, 3 tournaments, but one of those years, there wasn't even a tournament at all because of COVID in 2020. He got in 2019 Drake into the tournament as an at-large bid, which, again, they didn't win a conference, anything like that. They didn't win a tournament. The committee just thought Missouri Valley. School from the Missouri Valley is so good, we need to give them an automatic bid. That's the only time that's happened in their program history. They have made the tournament, Jed. Drake has 7 times in school history. 3 of those were Darian DeVries. So almost half of the times they've made the tournament in the entire history of their program has been Darian DeVries. Like I said, that number would be 4 and 8 if COVID hadn't happened and canceled a tournament. Wow. So, I mean, some of the stuff that he's done is just very impressive. Signs a 5-year deal with WVU. Started at Drake in 2018. They have had 11 20-win seasons in program history, Jed. He did it 6 straight years. They've won 20 or more games just 11 times in program history at Drake. He did it 6 of those 11 for 6 straight years. Last year, Drake went 28-7. They made the NCAA tournament once again. He's a 2-time MVC Coach of the Year. And most importantly, well, maybe not most importantly, but also important to note in all of this, Jed, final thing here for Darian DeVries, the new head coach of the WV men's basketball program. His son Tucker's a pretty good basketball player as well, too. Yeah. I see you grinning over there. You were wondering when this was coming, right? So his son Tucker last year averaged 21.6 points per game. That was the 6th most in all of college basketball. Averaged 21.6 points per game, 3.7 assists, 6.7 rebounds, shot over 36% from the three-point line. Jed, he will be accompanying his father, entered the transfer portal for maybe the shortest transfer portal that we've seen since Jordan Addison, and will be coming to West Virginia University. And we talk a lot about these different portal ranking websites, right, Jed? This is not just a case of nepotism of daddy bringing his son along. This is a kid who was a top 60 recruit coming out of high school a couple years ago. This is a kid who had offers from Iowa and Iowa State and some other Big 10 and Big 12 programs. This is a kid, Jed, who was number 1 on the transfer portal report rankings, number 1 on the CBS basketball transfer ratings, and number 3 overall on the On3 transfer portal ratings. So not only is WVU getting a head coach that has a resume that has a lot to like, he's also bringing his son, who on the open market would have been maybe the most sought-after kid in the transfer portal, has legitimate NBA potential. This is for what's been a long year and a program in desperate need of a kickstart, right? Man, check and checkmate. This is an exciting new dawn for our men's basketball program.
Where's the height come from? This is a 6'7" NBA guard, right? I mean, I don't see anybody else in that family with that kind of size. I mean, that was one of the first things I wondered. But at the press conference, he even came out and said, Coach did, he said, yeah, he's coming with me. So he'll be joining us here. It's one thing to get the coach that you wanted. It's another thing to get the coach that you wanted after basically a coaching search that lasted since last summer, right? It's another thing entirely to put a cherry on top to get the coach you wanted that you've been looking for since last summer to come with a foundational player as part of the package deal. So check all the boxes. A couple of things that stood out to me with my untrained basketball eye. I'm sitting there watching the press conference, listen to what he had to say. I'm very impressed by guys that close me without selling to me. And that's what it felt like. When you listen to him speak, he wasn't selling, he wasn't pitching. And yet I was eating it with a big spoon, everything he was saying, right? It sounded like, yeah, and it was genuine. It was off the cuff. Ren kept going back to this. And I think it all starts with Ren Baker. When you got the right person in position of leadership making these types of decisions in this modern era. There are a lot of things that Wren considered. Among those things, can you manage a program? Yes, under any circumstances at large, but can you manage one in the portal and NIL era? That mattered. Retention at Drake stands out. Those kids, with the winning and the success that they had a lot of opportunities to move on for bigger and brighter things from
No
a
doubt.
flash
No
and money
doubt.
standpoint. And by and large, they stuck around. So that speaks to the culture that he brings. That speaks to the culture that he builds. Something else that Wren kept going back to, and this might be the most appealing thing about him entirely. When you look at Coach DeVries, of all the accomplishments and accolades that you just touched on, the unprecedented success that he brought to Drake, the thing that might impress me most, he's coached for 26 years now at the college level.
Two
Two
places.
places.
Yeah.
That is, I can't stress how impressive that is. That speaks so much to his priorities, how selective he is. And Wren even said, in talking to everybody and working the phones, it wasn't just lip service for him to say, I don't want a job, I want this job. He said, because I encountered people who said he kind of cold shouldered them with some bigger jobs. He
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
wasn't nearly as interested in those other bigger jobs. And from a technical standpoint, Wren wanted a guy who can coach defense, believes in ball security. That's how you won in the Big 12. That's not a big surprise, right? One of the things that he said that fascinated me, again, my untrained basketball eye, it doesn't take much to get my attention. He said they like to try and score in the first 12 seconds of a possession before a defense truly has a chance to set up. In other words, you could argue that, yeah, transition is almost immediately what's taking place, but really some element of transition takes place for a good 10, 12 seconds while
Sure.
you're trying to set up.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so I've never heard anybody from a basketball
Yeah, that's
standpoint talk
interesting.
like that
Yeah.
about cashing in like that. And he's like, it's almost like they've studied it. When Coach DeVries was talking about it, he's like, look, the longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes to score on a defense that's truly set up and ready for what you're bringing. I thought that was fascinating to me, but everything he said was appealing to me.
Yeah.
And it's just such a real world family. I'm sitting there watching his family in the crowd, and even when he comments on certain things, he's talking about his son, and you look over at his wife, and her eyes are just glazed. I mean, she has tears in her eyes, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
because she's
It's pretty
so
cool.
she's so proud hearing her husband say these things about her son, and their teenage daughter is sitting next to him on her phone, and I'm like, that's such a real family. I'm like, who's also, as I understand, a pretty good player herself, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
I'm just like, what a great real family that West Virginia is getting,
It's awesome.
and I'm excited. You saw what's played out. Segue, here we go with what happened with Wren's last basketball hire on the women's
Yeah.
front,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
it's been a good one. It's been a good one. So Wren's track record, yeah, pretty solid so far, and yeah, it's hard to argue. It's hard to poke holes. I'm sure some will, and what you're going to get before the guys coach the game. But 26 years, who stops? Then the 6 years as a head coach, everything that you just enumerated there, how can you not be happy with this hire? I think bright days are ahead for West Virginia basketball once again.
Jed, overall wins each season 24, 20, 26, 25, 27, 28 in his 6 years at Drake. Overall conference finish first, eighth, second, 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 second. Uh, pretty,
It's
pretty
not like
darn
it's
good.
not like he was handed the baton of
No,
a
Drake.
program that was firing on all cylinders. They
No,
weren't.
this is think Kansas football. I mean, this
Yeah.
is like
Yep.
this Drake was a program. I mean, again, they've been to the tournament only 7 times in school history. He did it 3 of those 7 times. I
What I'm
mean,
saying, this isn't this what I'm saying, what I'm about to say isn't an indictment on Ryan Day. But if you compare Ryan Day's record as a head coach at Ohio State with what he inherited, that's not quite the same
it's a
as
great, yeah.
comparing
No,
it.
I totally get what you're
You see what
saying.
I mean?
Yes,
So yeah,
yes.
he had to build this thing and so quickly did so, accomplish those numbers in that short window of time.
No doubt.
So that makes it all the more.
Well said by you. And you know what, Jed, you mentioned the women's team there as well too. That's a good way to close down our around campus look here. Tough loss. I mean, you go to Iowa to take on the buzzsaw that is the Hawkeyes in their arena. Caitlin Clark, You got no help from the officials. But man, you gave them hell for 4 quarters. I mean, right there in that game was tied in the fourth quarter. There were some clinched butts there in Iowa thinking, oh, wait a second, we're really not going to lose this game, are we? I mean, I tell you what, an impressive win over Princeton in the first round. And then you go, I mean, literally into one of the most hostile environments you could imagine. 12,000 people, Caitlin Clark's last home game, a huge story, a huge crowd. And like I said, I mean, that game was tied with what, five minutes left, something like that. For that
Tied,
to
West,
be
with 2:13 to go.
with 2:13 to go. So with that to be the first year of Coach Kellogg, with the basketball team to go on a national stage in a task like that, and to show out and to impress and to do us all proud, we wanted to make sure we gave women's hoops a shout out here as well too.
I made mention the comparison I drew was the Sugar Bowl against Georgia on their front porch in Atlanta. That's the last postseason game that I can remember with West Virginia against an environment that challenging. But when you weigh in all the factors that you just talked about, it was at Iowa, the last night of Caitlin Clark's career. So you're not just going to get her best, you're going to get the crowd's best. All the powers that be from the TV landscape wanted Iowa to advance. They don't want to lose the cash cow that is Caitlin Clark and the ratings machine that is Caitlin Clark. All the odds were against you. So people were really approaching this as though, look, hell's going to freeze over before West Virginia goes into Iowa City and beats Caitlin Clark and the Hawkeyes. And you know what Coach Kellogg and those guys said? Fine, we'll play on the ice. Because they did. They played on the ice. Hell froze over. They dragged them out. Say what you want to say, but in the big picture, one of the things I wanted to do when the game ended was go online. I tortured myself by reading through some of the social media comments because I wanted to get a ratio. I want to get a true sense of, hey, is it just me? I don't think it's just me and the Mountaineer fans. I really think we got railroaded there. Well, of course, 95% of the West Virginia fans agree that we got railroaded. 95% of the Iowa fans. So what are you talking about? There's a perfectly called game. Matter of fact, I think it might have been a few calls that should have been made that weren't in our favor. Anyway, but
Yeah.
what was most important, those with no dog in the hunt, no dog or no horse in the race, either way, 95% of them agreed with West Virginia, including on the national stage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were a lot of national pundits chiming in saying, "What happened to West
There was
Virginia? They got
Jed. There
jobs."
was an article in the New York Post about how WVU got screwed. The New York Post.
I'll say this: Iowa might have won the game, but I think West Virginia emerged as America's team from what they did.
Yeah.
I think Caitlin Clark's probably less popular after that game than she was before the game, just by the way she conducted herself. And I think West Virginia is more popular. I can't imagine being Coach Kellogg because we saw the ratings. 5 million people watched that nationally. I can't even imagine if you parse it out even further and look at it demographically among high school female basketball players. Was there a ladies basketball player in America not watching that game? So can you imagine being Coach Kellogg and the opportunities that are going to come
No doubt.
to recruit and build that program? So, good on you. Hats off. I was so proud to be a Mountaineer with what they did against Iowa.
Same here. I'm with you on that one. Man, it would have been a dream to end Caitlin Clark's career. And WVU basketball has a fun history of doing that to some massive names across the landscape. I mean, Chris Paul played his last collegiate game against the Mountaineers. John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins played their last collegiate games against the Mountaineers. I think there's some more on that. Lance Stevenson, some big names that have gone on to have big NBA careers. It would have been fun to add Caitlin Clark to that list. But at the same time, like you said, I think all of us, man, if you would have told us before the season started, hey, first year of Coach Kellogg, you're going to find yourself in the second round of the tournament in a tie game in the fourth quarter in Iowa against Caitlin Clark and the Hawkeyes, I think we would all said, let's go. That's a good building point. That's a good jump off point for this new era of WVU women's hoops. So
It's a little frustrating, Wes, to close with this.
Mhm.
The fact that we were an 8 seed, if we'd have
Yeah.
even been slightly higher,
No
we wouldn't
doubt.
have found ourselves in
No
that
doubt.
situation. If we had faced Iowa, it would have been later on a neutral
No
site.
doubt.
So,
And Jed,
yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and lie to you like I'm some bracketologist, period, particularly when it comes to the women's game. But a lot of the people that seem to think WVU should have been a 7, maybe even a 6 seed instead of an 8. Hey, those are the breaks. I guess the other side of it is, like you just mentioned, you got that opportunity to play that national attention game, and hopefully you're able to build from that. Another thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford and our guy JR. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. And before we go to break here, Jed, I believe you saw JR, our buddy Philip Bowen, a what do we want to say here? A blending of our worlds on ITG with JR and with our buddy Philip Bowen down in Charleston. You had some fun with the concert last weekend, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a great night for the Drennings. We got out Saturday night. We went to Meagher's Irish Pub and Restaurant. Shout out to Meagher's in Bridgeport. My kids love the food at Meagher's. And wouldn't you know it, we sat down to eat. Here comes JR meeting his daughter for dinner, JR Toothman. So good company, good fun, good meal. My wife and I got to, at the invitation of Philip Bowen, not take part, but attend the concert. Great seats at the Robinson Grand there in downtown Clarksburg. And what a show. There were various artists, all West Virginia artists, kicking off the show, 3 acts leading up to Philip Bowen closing the show. And I'm telling you, I just marvel at that guy.
It's
He
pretty cool.
comes on stage, he breaks out the guitar, singing the songs that he wrote,
Pretty
and
cool.
just steals it. I mean, just steals the show. And what a talented guy. His brother Patrick is in the band, and I got to talk to Patrick. Philip hung around afterwards. He got to meet his parents. What great folks, West Virginia through and through. Just a
That's
great West
awesome.
Virginia family. And as I understand it, Patrick actually played a more significant role in the act than he normally even would. But great job by Patrick, great job by Philip. Their parents, great folks. But got to hang out with Philip for a few minutes afterwards. Introduced him to Chrissy. We had a blast,
That's awesome.
and Philip was even telling me that you talk about West Virginia through and through. He's back in the green room, and he even put out a tweet about what he was telling me about. He was watching the women's game before he came on stage in the green room. So I'm surprised we didn't hear him screaming on stage in the middle of the other acts. But great show by Philip Bowen. If you haven't so far, I encourage you to do so. I'm telling you, I'm picking up what he's putting down. Take in a live show involving Philip Bowen. Put it on your bucket list. Please do so. When you see him live, it's all the more special. But what an incredibly talented guy. Just
Love it.
thank you, Philip. Thank you to everyone for inviting us to that show. Glad we took part in it. Glad we made the most of it. But yeah, shout out to him, friend of the show. Please do yourself a favor, and if you get a chance, go see him live.
Heck yeah. It's a good plug there from Jed. I love it, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed yourself, and not surprised to hear that he took care of everybody and said hello to everybody, and that's the kind of guy that he is. And yes, our good friend of the show here. We wish him all the best, and yeah, make sure you're getting out to check him out on tour wherever you may be. A final thank you here to our friends at Johnson Equipment. Make sure you're checking out their new location, Route 33, right outside of Weston. We're going to take a break here. We come back on the other side, some spring ball thoughts as Mountaineer football is in the air once again. We'll wrap up the show with some spring moving and shaking on the other side. Wesley Euler, Jed Drenning, you are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
If you work the land, you just got to be a jack of all trades type. There's just too much to do. So if you got to be a welder or a farmer or a ditch digger, that's just who you are that day. Then tomorrow, you can be somebody else.
Get your Coyote at the new location of Johnston Equipment between Weston and Buchanan.
This is Philip Bowen, and you are in the gun.
Back in the gun here, and good point by Jed there while we were in break. philipbowenmusic.com/tour, or just if you go to his homepage, there's a big tour link there too, to make sure you are knowing when our guy Philip Bowen is in your area, and the opportunity to go see him. He's in Morgantown in a couple weeks in April, Southern West Virginia in June. He's got some shows in Georgia and Michigan in July, Denver in August, a couple Colorado shows in August, New Mexico and Indiana in September and October, back in West Virginia once again. So philipbowenmusic.com, then click the tour tab right there at the top to go see our what's that? Is that a guitar? No, that's not a guitar pick. What is that a donut? It looks like a donut almost.
Well, my little guy Mav, he opened the door here and in the studio, and he knows that I'm a peach ring guy. I love peach anything.
There you go.
Well, they got these puffed up versions. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it in camera here.
It almost looks like a mini donut.
If you're not watching, it kind of does. It's about that size, a very mini donut.
Are you nervous? It's a little sour. It might pucker you up here for the second half of the podcast.
Just a nibble.
Just a nibble, he says.
It's good.
Okay.
It's good.
That's smart by you, though, because you never know. A little too sour could put you down for the last part of the podcast here. That's good thinking by you, dear signal caller, as we roll along. So, all right, some spring ball, Jed. Give me some thoughts here. Spring ball practice opening this week. What's noteworthy as the moving and the shaking starts here in spring for the Mountaineer football program?
Well, what's fun this time of year is there's certain things that you want to look for going into spring practice. First, it's the first time that Neil comes and revisits with the media some of what's going on with the program from a big picture standpoint, how the offseason or conditioning portion of the offseason went. He gives you updates on who's going to participate, who's not. In this particular instance, Neil kicked off spring ball by thanking some of the areas of the program that don't get a lot of love, that have played instrumental roles in kind of getting us where we're at. He talked about strength and conditioning. We talk about Coach Joseph all the time. He talked about sports science and nutrition and recovery, even sports psych. So all these parts of the program that we don't discuss very often, this is the time of year where they come to the fore as much as any and play a central role. And I think in part, that's why you see, after being away from the kids for a while after the bowl game, that's why you're kind of surprised and taken aback by the change year where that's exciting. Like, for instance, I see Rodney Gallagher and he's packed on some more muscle, right? Yeah. Looks a little different. Traylon Ray looks a little different. So you see some of these things, but what's even more exciting when you consider some of the newcomers, both from a high school standpoint and from a portal standpoint, those guys, even since they arrived on campus in January, they've already started to transform their bodies. Mm-hmm. I mean, in some instances, some of these guys, Wes, have gained 15, 20 pounds. So we're seeing some significant changes with some of these guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's Mike Joseph's season, right? I mean, that's something that we talk about. And I think particularly, like, I like how you mentioned Rodney there. I think particularly for these guys that are between their first and second year, right? Because when you first get onto campus, yeah, that strength and conditioning is important without a doubt, but you've just got so much going on. Like you're trying to get ingrained in the program. You're trying to get ingrained in your new housing and campus and class. And like it's just a lot. Like your freshman year, your head's spinning the whole time. You know what I mean? Between
Yeah.
school, between football, between life. But this is the time, end of that freshman season, in the winter, in the spring, where it starts to slow down for you for the first time. And so, particularly for those guys that are heading into their second year, it's when
Yeah.
you really like to see that body transformation getting going, when they finally just had some time to breathe and reassess a little bit.
So we'll get into here when we wrap things up shortly. Some of the things that I've seen in a couple practice sessions. First of all, it's nice to be on hand because that's a little different than watching it on the practice cut ups in the video. But you can still get a lot out of the video too. But when you're there, you start to see some things play out outside of the drills that otherwise don't. And I got a pretty cool Austin Brinkman story that I'll share with you in a minute. But to recap some of the things that Neil kind of briefed the media with in the last couple weeks, just as spring ball is starting off. All right, from an injury standpoint, you want to know who's limited, who's taking part, who's not. Bryce Briggs, limited. Tomas Remack, he had surgery, he's going to miss the spring. Cole Taylor, surgery, really no contact. So you're going to see a lot of 10 personnel, not as much with the tight ends, but the other tight ends will get some work. CJ had surgery, he's limited. You see him out there running around, but again, very limited in what he's doing. It's a shame. Asani Redwood, surgery, he's going to miss another spring. And, Neil feels that he's ready to take a step. So it's unfortunate for him. Orion Fisher, surgery, will miss. Jai Favaris will miss. Now, it's exciting to get Trey Lathan back at full strength. Montre Miller back at full strength. He was lost very early last season at corner. Josiah Trotter. Wow, I can't tell you how excited I am to see Josiah Trotter at full strength. On the offensive line, they're moving some guys around, basically to see who fits where in emergency situations. They're moving Nick Cray around, moving Cooper Young around. They're even moving Wyatt down to place him on the interior. That kind of helps expand his value from a pro standpoint. And you never know, right? The receiver group, he said, we like the idea of training guys how to play at all three positions. Jaden Bray, the transfer from Oklahoma State, who's a good-looking dude. When you see him up close and personal, 6'2", 2 bills plus. He's the only new guy in that room right now so far, right? So from a carryover standpoint, that helps from when they're coaching him. Hudson looks sharp. Hudson looks fast. Hudson looks thicker. Neil has even said Hudson has put on weight and gotten faster. One of the biggest improvements among all our guys in the program. I can't argue that. Traylon Ray has gotten bigger. He's more physical than people realize. He's a really good blocker. And when Neil talked about Gallagher, he said, look, he's ready to become a true receiver. Last year, he was still learning the position after playing quarterback in high school. He talked about Garrett. Of course, Garrett unfortunately missed the first practice on Monday. He was at his grandfather's funeral. But he returned, I think, in the middle of the night, early Tuesday, about 3 a.m. So he took part in Wednesday's practice. But Nico took the reps with the ones on Monday. Neil said, look, Garrett's working on some footwork. He has that personal quarterback coach he's working with over the course of the offseason. We knew the issue in the fall, but it wasn't something that you'd really try and fix in the span of a week. So they're playing the long game with Garrett, working to improve his accuracy. It will involve a change in some of the footwork. And Neil even referenced Bo Nix. He said, look, we might have been the first staff to offer Bo Nix when we were at Troy. And Bo Nix is a guy that took this massive gargantuan leap from a completion percentage in the 50s to the low 70s. So there's no reason to believe that Garrett can't do that. Nico, again, when you watched him on Monday, very impressive. There's a certain element of confidence to Nico that he's carrying himself with. We're not in pads, so this is all still two-hand touch, but you can kind of watch how guys present themselves, what they project to those around him. He's, as Neil said, he's becoming more comfortable as a college football player. It's taken some time, but he's understanding what the defense does and what we do against it. He continues to work at pre-snap IDs and then post-snap decision-making. He has a chance to possibly be our most improved player. And again, I thought Nico had a really good practice on Monday. So those were some of the positives. If you look at, I'd say 4 areas that I want to monitor through the spring. One's more obvious than maybe the others. We heard when we had Drew in the offseason visit us, one of the things that he said multiple times this offseason, when spring ball starts and the actual pads are put on and we start playing a little bit of real football or something that resembles real football, the thing that he's going to be most excited to see is some of our longer additions on the defensive side taking real snaps when the actual bullets fly in game-like conditions competitively. How are they going to fare? And that's one of the things to discuss too, because Drew's often told me, he's like, "Hey, you're on the wrong side of the field watching that offense. You got to get down here and watch this defense." So, and there's merit to that. So when you watch, I'll go through some of the names. I've highlighted them on my roster here. When you watch Garnett Hollis, the transfer, of course, from Northwestern, he's probably the longest of these additions on the back end that we're talking about. He's 6'2", 200 plus. He's a true corner. And he has the ability, once he gets settled into our schemes, because these guys are kind of parachuted onto campus and they played a lot of football, but they haven't played a lot of football in this particular scheme. So the language is going to have to slow down for him a little bit, but you see the skill set there. Boy, do you see the traits there. You really do. And the same holds true of Jaheim Joseph, who is a safety who transferred in as well from Northwestern. You see all the traits there. It's just not quite there yet in terms of what things are going to shape up or turn into, because that element of comfort doesn't happen for a while. You got to rep your way through that. So when you're looking at those newcomers on the back end, those guys are impressive. I'm going to go through some of the other newcomers on the defensive side. TJ Jackson has a lot of burst. And this is another guy. He's truly already, with Mike Joseph, transformed his body. I mean, one of the indictments, if there was one, was his lack of size. When he was at Troy, he was around 260. He's already in the mid 270s, and I don't think he's done yet. So he's already put on 15 quality pounds. And this is a guy, a very twitchy guy, has a lot of burst. And so you can park him on the edge and he can be very disruptive against those offensive tackles or tight ends. So I think that you see the potential there with him. Aiden Garnes, the guy that we faced last year, who was a corner at Duquesne. This is a guy you can cross train. There's an element of physicality in Aiden Garnes. He's 6 foot, a buck 70, but he plays a physical brand of football. He really does. I mean, he can play the post position at safety. He's comfortable in that kind of space, being attacked. We can drop him down over the edge, put him at spear. So he has that kind of ability, but also as a true corner parked out on an island, you see the coverage skills that are there. Again, it's raw because he's still learning what's going on. But one of the things that I noticed when you're watching him rep out, even if he reads, for instance, a perimeter screen or a flare screen coming his way, Aiden Garnes has that knack up close and personal. You'll see him just out leverage the wideout because he quickly diagnoses what's happening and bursts on the outside shoulder of the receiver before the receiver can get true hands on him, and he's setting the edge. So now all of a sudden he knows his help. Aiden Garnes knows his help defensively. He's on the inside. So that screenplay has nowhere to go.
Right.
You're not born understanding that. That's just a natural, instinctive thing that defensive backs, good ones, are able to do. And that's one of the things that I've already seen out of Aiden Garnes. TJ Crandall's a guy, transferred from Colorado State, another corner. Neil's talked about this. Look, he might be a transfer. When you think of, in terms of portal players, you think of more advanced veteran players. This is his second semester in college. So let's not put the horse before the cart here. I mean, there's a lot of potential and ability there, but things are going to take a little bit of time for him to rep his way through there. Reed Carrico, transfer from Ohio State, another guy that's a true creature of the box, Ironton, Ohio kid. I think everything about him fits West Virginia football. He's a downhill physical defender. So, especially with what we're doing with this 3-4, Neil talked about the fact that we have 5, maybe even 6 guys that we're comfortable with playing in that box area. Because when we changed our scheme from more of an even front configuration last year to more of a true odd front 3-4 style, what that does is it changes the body types in your linebacking core. So now your Mike and your Will have more similar skill sets. Remember how surprised everybody was last year? The big question was who's going to play Will. That was one of the big camp questions. Well, what nobody understood was, well, that's not quite the question you think it is, because in a 3-4, the Will is a box player as much as the Mike sometimes is. So we have 5 or 6 guys, and it's funny because I heard Neil say, what we've found is an ability at West Virginia to recruit those types of physical, hard-nosed, downhill, Mike and Will 3-4 style box players, as opposed to maybe some of the longer, more athletic, true 4-3 or even front, Will backers. And I remember in Rich's early days, if you remember his first year at West Virginia, we didn't run the odd stack. It didn't start until his second year. What they quickly realized as a staff was it's difficult to run an even front defense at West Virginia because for a host of reasons, but you can't those 3 technique disruptive defensive tackles that you need to populate an even front defense. They don't grow on trees, so you can't major in it. So what you can do is
most of them end up going to an SEC or a Big Ten school.
Yes, and even they don't have a lot of depth there because there's not a lot of them. All right. But what you can do and what you can recruit at West Virginia are a lot of hybrid type defenders, the body type that can be, a backer / defensive back. So as a result, we pivoted and went to an odd stack. So it's very interesting that all these years later, you see Neil and Jordan Leslie and the defensive staff in part pivoting to an odd front configuration, a 3-4, because of the ability to recruit those types of backers, those Reed Carrico types of linebackers. And now here's one, Wes. Ty French, I'm working my way through numerically on the roster. Ty French on the defensive side. This guy's already up to 250. He's 6'3", 250. And both on tape and in person, I've watched him off the edge. And I keep looking back to the roster saying, there's something wrong here. There's no way that kid weighs 250 because of the way he moves. He is so explosive. And what's unique about it, what I haven't seen out of him yet, and maybe it's just a function of learning the scheme and being more comfortable in what he's asked to do. Normally, when I see an explosive, disruptive force off the edge, it's all about the first step. That's what we so often talk about with these pass rushers, right? But I haven't seen the first step be quite as dynamic with Ty French yet. It's just the overall burst that he has. I can't explain what he looks like coming off the edge, and he comes in at 250.
That's awesome.
So when you look at a combination of TJ as an edge player, by and large, more of a tackle type that can play to the boundary, but you can do some other things with him. But when you look at Ty French, he's an edge guy. He's an edge guy. He's a disruptive, explosive force off the edge. And then finally, if you look on the other side of the football, of course, we have a transfer tackle on Xavier that I think does have a bright future. He just needs to, speaking of Mike Joseph, I just think he needs to get comfortable and have a little more strength to him. But we went after him hard as a preferred walk-on coming out of high school. He's a West Virginia kid, but we went after him very hard. It didn't work out. And Jack State, Coach Trick had offered him. He saw something there as Trick often does and offered him. So yeah, I'm looking at these newcomers and seeing if there's anybody I missed. Let's see. Okay, offensive tackle again. Oh yeah, Kate. Excuse me. When you look on the offensive side, we talked in passing about Jaden Bray. Jaden Bray from Oklahoma State is a guy that is going to be able to do a lot of things for us. It's just he's also going to have to learn the language, learn the system, rep his way through that. But impressive body type. He's going to fit right into that room. But from the transfer standpoint, those are some of the things that Neil's discussed. And I want to get your thoughts on these things as we go through the 4 topics to close out. What are your thoughts on those defensive backs and how they stack up? What I want to get your general impression of the additions we made in the offseason. Okay. You haven't seen the tape I've seen, but we've discussed the body types, the personnel. So I want to work our way through that before we get into category number 2 of 4, which will be the pass rushers. But what do you see there?
I'm excited because it feels like the deepest the secondary's been under Neil. I don't know if we have the high end Beanie Bishop talent amongst this group, but at the same time, Jed, I mean, this time last year, Beanie wasn't even on the roster yet, was he? Correct? Yeah, right, because he was after spring ball, right? So,
Yeah, after spring ball.
that I'm very encouraged by that. I think they have got a nice blend of veteran guys with some younger talent in there as well too. Um, I like the options. I like the depth in the secondary. Again, I like and safeties maybe a little bit different because we know what Aubrey Burks is capable of, but particularly at the corner position.
Or do we? That's the question, Wes.
Well, that's true.
That's one of the
That's
most
true.
intriguing prospects right now to me is the fact that the depth that we're enjoying on the back end now puts us in position to tinker with Aubrey
No
Burks.
doubt.
Because
No doubt.
when I think of Aubrey Burks, I don't think of the post player. I think of the box player. When Aubrey's at his best, he's a physical downhill force.
Oh yeah,
And one of the things when you rep him out at
Tyke
speed,
Smith vibes there. You know what I
absolutely.
mean?
A matter of
Yeah.
fact, it's funny you'd say that because Neil even said Aubrey gives us opportunities as an edge pressure player to blitz off the edge, off
No
the
doubt.
slot
No
that we
doubt.
haven't seen since Tyke. So the I think the depth that we enjoy on that back end now with these new faces plus the returners affords us the opportunity to tinker with Aubrey Burks and
Yeah.
maybe more
Yeah, sure.
often put him in position. So you're onto something there. You mentioned Tyke, you talked about Aubrey. So yeah, I think all this comes together in a pretty fun way. And I still don't think we're quite done yet. I do think we're going to add one more
Yeah.
face to that room.
Yeah, I agree.
At
I
corner.
agree. So I'm very optimistic about what they have, the ingredients that they have to cook with in that room. Yeah.
We're in a position with Jordan now not coaching a particular position, but more of an overseer of all things defensively. We're putting the corners and the safeties kind of together more than they have been in the past. So, from a continuity and communication standpoint, I think that'll shore some things up. It now puts Jordan in a position to truly have his hands and fingers and fingerprints on every level of that defense. So, he works very well in conjunction with Shadon. So, when you look at the secondary, not only do we have new faces, but it's a great opportunity to bring those corners, those new safeties with the returning corners, the returning safeties all together into one meeting session. And I'm excited about what that back end's going to do. And when you look at what we return at linebacker, in addition to what we're bringing in, and there's even a couple young names that I didn't bring up yet. Zay Jennings comes to mind. Israel Boyce comes to mind. Those guys could play early, not just contribute on special teams, but maybe even provide some relief on the back end, steal a couple reps here and there. But those linebackers, we talked about Trotter. We know what Ben Cotter can do. Having him back means all the world. Trey Lathan back at full strength. Remember what he was doing through 5 games last year?
He was maybe the best player on the defense.
And now you can kind of tinker with that other spot. Again, you got Carrico, but there's all these different possibilities and candidates to do different things schematically. And that's one of the things that the spring's about, Wes. It's about figuring out who best fits where.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's where you get into the pass rush portion of it. When you talk about, that's the second thing I wanted to ask you about. I talked about some of the newcomers, but bear in mind, we got some talent coming back. Yes, we lost Jared Bartlett and Portlet, but I'll tell you what, it's a pretty fair trade when you consider what we brought in addition to bringing Sean Martin back and bringing some of the possibilities that even on the interior, I think there's some excitement in terms of what we can do to push that pocket.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, like you said, Bartlett, leaves, Hurd leaves, but at the same time, it feels like you've got options there. Sean Martin coming back is a great benefit. I mean, I think he can fit in that mold. He's obviously at this point a program guy. He's got a ton of experience. But you're right. The edge rushers are intriguing to me because there's talent there without a doubt. There's some proven production there, but can we get that real disruptive force? That's what they really need coming off the edge is a consistent disruptive force. And I wonder if anybody is emerging as that guy here early in spring.
French was pure unmitigated production at a lower level.
Yeah.
And so the intriguing prospect of him taking the next step at this level, he is so explosive. And TJ Jackson, the more comfortable he becomes in the room, I mean, hiding inside TJ Jackson is an alpha waiting to emerge. It really is. When you show up new on campus You
Sure.
got to kind of
Sure.
orient yourself and learn your
Sure.
way and
Sure.
earn the trust of your teammates and earn the respect of
No
your
doubt.
teammates.
No doubt.
And that's what these guys are doing. So I look at these candidates and I'm very excited about the prospects of what some of these guys are going to be able to do. And then, the third out of the four things I wanted to ask you, we talked big picture overview with the wideouts. Look, last year we were so young. We had Devin Carter and all these newbies, right?
Yeah.
Well, this year those newbies are going to be playing much more expanded roles. I think Hudson Clement is ready to take a step potentially onto the national scene. I think Traylon Ray he's going to play at the next level for a long time. I truly think that. And he is about to take the next step in what he does. And Rodney Gallagher, no longer are you going to, you saw the talent and the raw ability with Rodney last year, but you so had to so desperately manufacture ways to feed him the football that didn't overthink him. All right. Hey, how about we just jet sweep you? How about we just touch past you? But now he can be part of the actual scheme. He can be a true asset and big picture offensive player. And from a matchup standpoint, now is when you get into the areas with those newbies who are no longer newbies, but had all the potential in the world. Now you can start using them from a matchup standpoint, because I'm sure there were times that whether it was Rodney, whether it was Traylon, I'm sure that Neil was just salivating, sitting down with Drew. Man, I wish they understood things well enough to do this with him or do that with him. Well, now you can. You can see a matchup that favors you, and you can lean into it. And when you got a guy in that room, like the addition that we made from Oklahoma State and the production that he brings, I like what I see in that room. You see what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. And I think, listen, Hudson Clement, you got way more from him last year than anybody expected. And you mentioned the body transformation, and I think the potential that is there for that year 2 leap forward. Traylon Ray, same thing. I mean, a guy that just has the raw skill set, needed a little polish, needed a little time in the lab with Coach Joseph, and he's gotten that now. And then what's encouraging to me is, too, like, we've spent a good amount of time talking about Hudson. He's getting a fair amount of attention. Traylon Ray as well, too, I think, particularly after the bowl game that he had. But you're right. Like, Rodney Gallagher has kind of always been the highest rated recruit with the proverbial highest ceiling. And it almost feels like he's, I don't want to say taking a back seat, because that's the wrong way to label it, but you get what I'm saying. Like, we're talking a lot about Huddy. We're talking a lot about Traylon. And still Rodney Gallagher waits as kind of the one who is, supposed to be the dude amongst that class. So you had your growing pains last year, without a doubt. I mean, Devin Carter was kind of in a different, just point in his timeline of his career than those other guys were. You had some growing pains last year. You had some times last year where you needed a little bit more from the wide receiver room, and it just wasn't always there. But I think that's going to do a 180 this year. I think you're absolutely right. I think you combine the 3 young guys who have now been with the program. They're going to have that full calendar year under their belt, all the benefits of scheme and strength and conditioning and just comfort and all those things. And then you add a couple transfers in there as well, too. I think, listen, I don't want to say the wide receiver position was a weakness last year, Jed, because I think that'd be a little too harsh. Like, I don't want to say it was a weakness, but I don't think it was a strength at the same time. There was more to be desired there from the wide receiver room, and I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to start fulfilling that here this spring and then into the fall, obviously.
The way that I might say it, that's a good point. When you look at last year, it was a strength that you had to set the table for. If you set the pieces in place, if Neil and Chad were able to put things together a certain way,
you had to cook the perfect dinner, right, to put it on the table.
Right. Yeah. But now I think you're going to take a step as you cross-train these guys. They can set the table for themselves and make 100%. Some things happen. So now, 100%. I mean, each brings different skill sets and strengths to the table. So now, instead of saying, man, that nickelback for such and such, he's very bad at this, or that corner for such and such, he's very bad at that. Well, now you can take, whatever piece you think most exploits that weakness, move it to where you can exploit it, because you're cross-training these guys with all this carryover in this room. So I think you're going to be in position to do that. You saw the ability and the talent last year out of these young guys.
No doubt.
But again, I think it was a heavy lift by Neil and the offensive staff to put them in position to do that. It'll be a lighter lift in my estimation this year, which leads us to category 4 out of the 4 categories, the quarterback spot. I can't stress enough when in this era of the portal, when you look how incredibly fortified we are in that room with not just one, but 2 guys that can win games. And I do think Garrett, being Garrett, is going to set the table and set himself up to truly take the next step
No
and
doubt.
be a more efficient passer from an intermediary standpoint. He's still going to be a deep ball threat. He's very smart with protecting himself. He's going to become smarter. So I think you're going to see Garrett become more and more of a complete player, much like we saw down the stretch last year, and a more consistent player. That's what I truly think you're going to see with Garrett. And with Nico, I think you're going to see him continue to take bigger steps and bigger strides, because when you watch him from a big picture standpoint, boy, you see ways that you can win games with that guy.
Yeah,
I mean, you're
absolutely.
starting again. I'm just watching him run the offense in practice with spider gear on, and I'm thinking there's an aura to him that people respond to, and there's a skill set.
It's the hair.
And
It's
boy,
the hair, Jed.
he hit EJ Horton on this one deep ball for a scoring strike. That great read, great posture, great poise, great timing. I told him when he came off the field, dude, the timing on that was impeccable. But anyway, what are your thoughts on that? We'll close out with the Austin Brinkman story and call this a night.
I love the combination there. I mean, there's some. So when I think of Garrett, right, it makes me laugh. Everyone knows the famous scene from Remember the Titans, right, where Sunshine comes into training camp with his hair, right, and everything.
Yeah.
And there's the scene where, I mean, he can make every downfield pass, but he can't complete the pitch out of the backfield to Julius, to the running back, right? And it's like, and Denzel Washington's like, hey, you could throw it a quarter of a mile, but you can't pitch it 3 yards. Like, there was some element of that with Garrett's game last year. It's like, son, you can hit all the home runs, but sometimes we just need you to hit a single out to left field. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes we just need you to make the layup. We don't need you to make the half court 3-pointer. And so I think that that's a big final kind of element of Garrett's game coming together that everyone is aware of, that by all accounts, it sounds like he is improving upon. And that's huge for his game and for this team. And then the Nico element that you discussed there. Listen, Jed, I mean, I do radio for the Steelers, right? I host a show with Arthur Moats, former Bills and Steelers linebacker who spent a decade in the NFL. And he always laughs at me. He always shakes his head at me when I do this. But like, in football, it's not a question of if you're going to get injured. It's a question of when you're going to get injured. I mean, that's just the sport. And particularly when you play the quarterback position like Garrett Green does, with some mobility, with some reckless abandon at times, right? More often than not, and I'm knocking all the wood here, right, that I can, but you're going to need Nico at some point heck, even if it's just for a series or two this season to get you out of a stadium with a win, right? But that's just the nature of football. I talk about this with the Steelers all the time. 5 of the last 6 seasons, the Steelers have had to use multiple quarterbacks, right? Only one time in the last 6 seasons have the Steelers used the same quarterback for 17 games. And there's injuries, there's COVID, there's performance, there's a lot of stuff that played into that over the last 6 years. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast in football. And so, again, knocking on all the wood, Garrett stays healthy for 12 games. Garrett is good to go, no injuries, no nothing. But in reality, in football, more than likely, you're going to need somebody in a pinch. That's just the nature of the sport. And for Nico to be that guy is huge. I don't think you can get much better. I don't think you can get somebody who's going to be more ready for those moments, who gives you more confidence if he has to go in a pinch. And then, like you said, too, I mean, I don't think Nico is just going to be some serviceable guy. I think he's reaching that point in his career arc where he's a real difference maker. And so for the transfer portal era to be able to run it back with both of those 2 guys again is just, man, it's a heck of a luxury, without a doubt.
It's incredible. It says a lot to the culture of the team to keep them both intact. It says a lot about the vision of both those players and the relationship of both those players. So yeah, I'm excited about it. And look at this. Here's how excited we are about spring ball. We got all the way up to this point, and we didn't even mention Jaheim. So
yeah, exactly right.
yeah, we'll talk about him next time, right? But
That's right.
But
Next
Wes,
week.
what I wanted to do, I want to close out with first of all, tease for next week. We're gonna start a fun sequence of trivia
we are.
matchups that will involve you, the runaway beer truck, one Mr. Skyler Callahan. So it's going to be some W football trivia that you guys do not want to miss. It's going to be a blast. We had a teaser with Philip Bowen on the show against the beer truck, but it's going to get a lot more fun. But I wanted to tell you a story about how practice ended the other day. It's one of the things that Neil's very good at is generating, I should say, manufacturing genuine pressure situations and see how the kids respond. He'll pick a kicker or a punter or a quarterback or a snapper, whoever it might be, and he finds creative ways to legitimately manufacture game type pressure.
Sure.
Like when your whole team is on the line for something, right? You need to deliver. So at the end of practice the other day, he brought out a couple long snappers. Of course, Austin Brinkman, in my estimation, one of the best long snappers in the country, was among them. And he said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. If they hit 2 out of 3 through the quarterback net. Now, picture the quarterback net. For those that haven't seen it, it's a net that the quarterbacks use for drills. There's 3 boxes diagonally from the top corner to the bottom corner. The boxes are only 10 by 10 inches, maybe 12 by 12 inches. Yep. We got a thumbs up or something going on there.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. We'll take it.
I don't know where that came from on the YouTube, but there's another one. But so they're not very large boxes, and the quarterbacks throw through them during drills. Well, Neil positioned the long snappers 15 yards away from the quarterback net. And he said, "All right, here's the deal. That lower box in the lower corner, you got to hit that one. And if you hit it 2 out of 3 times," and what he did was he divided the team into 2 sides. Half the team was on one side, half the team was on the other side. Out of this many up downs. I mean, there were a bunch of up downs at stake. Now, for those who don't know what up down is, they suck. Okay. It's standing in place, you're running in place, you hit the ground, you come back, they suck. We don't like them. Football players don't like up downs. Normal ones anyway. For all I know, there's some out there that do. Maybe even no one likes them. I don't know, but I hate them. All right. Normal football players hate up downs. So he puts a bunch of up downs at stake. Well, what happens is the first snap, both of them missed their target on the net. So Neil, thinking on the fly, he said, "I'll tell you what, that means they have to hit the next 2. That's not fair to you guys. I'm going to do something else. Let's make it fun." One snap, Austin Brinkman. One snap. Everything's on the line. Now, if he hits it, you got no up downs. But if he misses it, you got this many. Ooh. Now, if you want to take that bet, you can either take the up downs you now owe me, and you have nothing further to bet. You can go with the up downs now, the minimal up downs that you now have. Or if you want to bet on Austin Brinkman, to hit this and gamble it, step over here and join this side. And that means you're betting on Austin Brinkman. If he misses it, you got way more up downs. But if he makes it, you got none. If you want to stick with the up downs you currently have, stay over there. 85% of the team came to the one side.
Let's go.
I mean, there's 15 guys over on the other side. And the other 85% were betting on Austin Brinkman.
That's fantastic.
So the chanting starts, the noise starts, the intensity, the pressure starts. So the next thing you know, Austin lines up. He gets the snap ready, 15 yards away from that tiny target. Shoosh, right through the target.
Love it.
Nothing but net. Nothing but. So the 85% erupts. They pick Austin Brinkman up in celebration, and now they get to gather around their 15 teammates who didn't bet on Austin Brinkman and start talking trash while they're doing the up downs.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now at the end of practice, the best thing was Neil capped it off with the lesson that they learned. He said, "Guys," he said, "there's a lesson to be learned in what you just saw. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's competitive. Yeah, it's intense. And yeah, there's pressure there, but at the same time, know your teammates." He said, "I think most of you do." He said, "But what you have to understand about Austin Brinkman is honestly as good or better at what he does than anyone on this football team."
That's exactly right.
And he said, "As a matter of fact, when we put position rankings out in August, he's always at the top of the heap. He's the best person on the team at what he does." So now you know how good Austin Brinkman is at what he does on this football team. If you didn't already know, now you do. And I thought that was just awesome.
That's a great story. That's the insight that only the signal caller can bring us. And I think that's also a great way to close down this episode of ITG. That's fantastic. Always have faith in your teammates. That's the lesson here, if I'm being honest, you know?
Never leave your wingman.
That's it. That's exactly right. Never leave your wingman. Never bail on your brother. But that's going to do it for this edition of ITG. A big thanks to my teammates, to my wingmen, the signal caller, Jed Drenning, of course, our buddy, the beer truck Owen Schmidt, and our producer Skylar Callahan as well. We'll all be back next week with that trivia edition of ITG, as Jed mentioned. We will also continuing to line up some fun guests for you throughout the off season here, and we will obviously keep an eye on spring ball as that rolls along as well. But before we get out of here, the one thing that we ask of you, as always, is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. For Owen, for Skylar, for Jed, I am Wesley Euler. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening to this edition of ITG. Take care, enjoy the weekend, and we will talk to you next week. You've been In the Gun.